There are many people who want to go to El Salvador because they'll become the absolute healthiest if they go to that country. And obviously, you want to go to the country that will make you the healthiest. You were there for quite some time. What did you think about it?
Okay, yeah, exactly. So maybe to give people some background, that it's I think the 13th latitude, so it's very close to the equator. So the solar yield and the amount of UVB especially is very good. And then it's got stable light cycles. So the sun usually gets up about around about, we'll just say six-ish, and then it sets at about 5:36-ish, and it's the same all year round. So that's very helpful for especially mental stability and hormones and sleeping. Then the area itself is volcanic. So you've got the magnetism aspect, even though in terms of some aspects of magnetism, which is kind of a complicated subject, there is less generally the closer you go to the equator. It has a coastline, so you can swim in the sea or walk on the beach, which again is probably one of the best environments for grounding, getting full body immersion, some kind of cold thermogenesis. And then the atmosphere around places like a beach are really good for sort of charging up the aura, which is just in terms of physics, a cloud of charge of plasma around us. So it's a perfectly validated physical phenomena that we could sort of talk about another time. So that's the main reason. So if you want to sort of look at things in terms of water, light, and magnetism, it ticks all of the boxes because the grounding and the amount of sun will also be very favourable for our sort of water battery, if you will, in simple terms. And then all of that environment's very favourable for our mitochondria, which themselves make deuterium depleted water, as well as a whole host of other things, like there's a little microprocessor inside us. And without them being healthy, we're wide open to probably like 85% of chronic disease, or just in simple terms, just having low energy and high inflammation. There's other advantages as well. So even though there's more deuterium at the equator because of the temperature and the solar yield, it felt like I was pretty much having a sauna all day because I was sweating. And then ultraviolet A light also promotes sweating, and it also promotes the production of nitric oxide, which has numerous health benefits, like not just blood pressure that people are familiar with, but immunological and brain benefits. And on the subject of UVA, of course, it's a really amazing environment for making lots of melanin. And there's a lot more to melanin than people think. It's not just a suntan. Um, Electronically, it's a semiconductor, but it's also got the potential with bioplasma to be a superconductor. So that's kind of really important in terms of energy, because a superconductor is where the electron can just move indefinitely without sort of resistance, like we would find resistance in common daily appliances in the wire. And then another very important aspect of melanin is it's a transducer, so it can absorb soliton waves, light, sound, and it can convert, I think, photons into phonons. So phonons are just sound in liquid, and then it can do it the reverse. So it can do a phonon to a photon. This is more research that I looked into. A Polish person, Dr. Adam Adamski, alerted me to all of this because he kind of writes write-ups of studies of melanin. He's very interested in plasma and consciousness and stuff like that. So melanin doesn't just play a sort of protective role in the body, it's also fundamental for our senses and how we actually are able to compute multi-stimuli, because something like an ear or an eye can just do light or just do sound. Whereas, like I said, melanin can receive a multitude of inputs and it can output in several channels. So it's like one of those really fancy travel plugs that you take that can accept USBs, plug into all different kinds of sort of sockets. So melanin is more than we think. And then just in terms of energetics, Dr. It's Herrera, and how melanin potentially can split water in the presence of UV means it's a reservoir of electrons, which is further energy or charge or currency to the body, and also molecular hydrogen, which is a really interesting molecule, more than just an antioxidant or a hormetic agent, or it's deeper than that. How hydrogen actually provides energy in the body and what it does, because it's one of these molecules that sort of obeys the sort of phi or the golden ratio. If you look at its radius, and it's potentially implosive, so it can make energy by implosion, not explosion. I won't go into too much of that detail. That's just me having been in Dan Winter's rabbit hole for about 2 years, trying to unpack other aspects of sort of biophysics. So, in terms of simple things, which I started off with, all the way up to very complicated reasons of why going to El Salvador with all its light and its magnetism and its potential for grounding in water and the seaside, it does make a very attractive place. It also doesn't have 5G at the moment. And when you fly over it, you can see that it's not hugely densely populated, but there are sort of pockets of places where it's becoming more populated, especially a tourist area. Because I went to El Tunco and also Tamanique, and because of the political instability in the past, some places are much safer for tourists than others. Although, having spoken a lot to the locals, like a local chiropractor and the person who I stayed with, had fluent English and had left El Salvador and come back 30 years later, they were telling me what a spectacular job of cleaning up the corruption and the structure in the country that President Bukele had done. So it was nice to hear it from sort of locals who are very savvy of the past, because they lived through it, kept in touch over sort of 30 years, and can see the difference. So there's definitely lots of benefits. In terms of becoming superhuman, this is something I've always wondered, because the people at the equator tend to be really short, like Mexicans. And then the El Salvador people were very short. I was taller than, I'd say, than a large proportion of the men, and definitely all the women were shorter than I was. But on the other hand, it could be the fact that it's still classed as a low income country and poverty is a problem. And then they have their own traditional dishes, like the papusa is sort of like like a flatbread that's made of, I think, corn and another grain. I didn't eat it just because it's not really my thing, but they griddle it on probably seed oils now. And then there was lots of street vendors who had the constant pot of seed oils with goodness knows what's being thrown in to fry. So it's one of these things. I would have been interested to know what the people looked like before the blue light and the seed oils arrived. Because I know in China, the common argument people bring up is, oh, well, if rice is fattening, why were the Chinese thin? But then as soon as seed oils arrived and that got mixed with the rice, then an obesity problem started in China as well. So there's definitely um, something not quite right with accessibility of locals to high quality nutrition, but also there's still a blue light problem there. Like I'd say, people where I was don't really understand that it's they leave lights on at night and they have just white curtains, and you can get Alan, the artificial light at night really easily. So, to unpick exactly why. But on the converse, there were lots of fit bodies, because where I stayed was a surfing town. So you can imagine that there was people that just spent all day in the sea surfing in the sun. And they weren't wealthy, because the sort of wages for locals aren't the same as it would be in the US. So I can't say they would have eaten extremely good food and would have just eaten what the street vendors were selling just because it was their colleagues. And the surfer people definitely looked the part of the superhuman, but you can understand why, because they really were outside a large proportion of the day in the water in a magnetic area. So then, from my perspective, because I already had a decent grounding in quantum, I'd sort of taken myself as far as I could using what I had above the tropics. And I already had a solar callus. I already very tolerant to heat, like strong sunlight and cold. So it made sense for me from a sort of, can I improve myself any more level, to go there and see if it was all true. And I can actually report that there's definitely something happened to me there, sort of like a brain upgrade. And it could have been the people I was around, because I went for a retreat and or sort of a mini conference. So there was lots of like-minded people lots of people much younger than me who aren't cynical and bitter and grumpy, and all of them were into the quantum movement. Anybody who was visiting or coming to teach movement or circling or meditation weren't quantum, but they very quickly completely adopted all of our lifestyles of sunrise and blue blockers, even if they found it a bit weird in the evening that everybody suddenly just went to bed and didn't hang out. And they really said they were completely converted because they actually lived how like the best possible quantum environment for a brand new person, because they were exposed to people who understood everything and it could explain it all to them in simple terms or complicated terms. And then they just did everything we did all day, every day. And straight away were just wowed by seeing the sunrise, seeing the sunset, be experiencing this environment, and then they took on board the blue blockers and things like that very quickly as well, because everybody else had them. Then when it came to problems, sleeping is a problem because it's hot and aircon, and I'm not used to electronics in my bedroom or noise, or I have my room completely black. Even though the person who I stayed with helped me put up blackout curtains, there was still all kinds of bits of light that got round the corner. And then obviously you can't turn off the Wi-Fi, and I unplugged all the devices, and then I needed the aircon because it's impossible to sleep without it. I did try, because again, sleeping in a cool environment like my house here is uh, sort of conducive for health. So while I was there, because it was sort of quite overwhelming, and when you're around a lot of people you all resonate with and you feel comfortable talking about anything, no matter how ridiculous it might be, and people were very open, and we laughed a lot and we learned a lot, and then it was so bright and just like in my face. I did actually look forward to going home at the end, just because I thought I'd pretty much had enough of the light. So when I got back, my house is obviously set up for me in the UK, how I like it. So I couldn't wait to get back to the coolness, the darkness, and the silence. And then my non-native EMFs that I'm used to, and I'm very particular about blue light. It really, really bothers me. And then I've got all my own weird quantum things. Like I'm really into plasma balls, and then I have a Magnetico, which works when I first sleep on it for a bit, but then sometimes, I have to be away from it. So I slept for sort of 12 hours when I got home straight away. And then ever since I've got back, I found that as soon as I've wanted to go to bed, I've just lain in it, slept, and woken up maybe once, gone back to sleep and woken up. So I've done whatever sort of sleeping I missed out on El Salvador, I've been able to massively capitalize on it here. And I think that's really important, because I obviously must have stored or trapped a load of light, because I made sure to do as much catching of UVA and B light as possible in El Salvador. And there's definitely molecules like all of the vitamin D molecules that trap light. Then, of course, the neurotransmitters will. There are, like, we have so many ring structures in our body, like five-membered rings or pentagons or hexagons. Basically, all of our ring structures, whether it's a sex hormone or serotonin or histamine, it's all made out of rings. So they have delocalized electrons, and they are potential. Some of them are fluorophores and some of them are just electron holders. So there's definitely, I feel that beyond just getting the most insane tan I've ever had, there's all sorts of other things biologically which have gathered essences of El Salvador and brought it back, because I didn't get any jet lag when I got back. And normally if I come back from the US, I do. And the time difference is 6 hours for me. And the actual travel time door to door is 24 hours. So obviously it's just EMF and blue light and being in the sky central. So when I got back, I felt I didn't actually lose any of my benefits there. I actually feel like something else has happened, just because with my sleeping, like I said, I just sleep way better than I ever have done. And I never was a bad sleeper, but I've really noticed the difference, and like really wild dreams and things like that. So I think it's one of these important things that if you go and collect the benefits, they definitely last. I've ordered labs and everything. They just kind of sent me the wrong collection kit. and then it was really slow to replace it because of it being Christmas, because I really wanted to run specific labs as 4 days after I had got back to the UK, not the day I landed, because I'm just going to be reading the catastrophic effects of flying on my metabolism. I really wanted to see vitamin D, and I really want to see storage vitamin D. So I had to wait a bit. But definitely in terms of how I feel, I definitely felt the best ever from coming back from something which potentially is massively different to the circadian rhythm and the light and temperature I'm used to. When I went to New Zealand in December, I think it was 4 years ago, was going somewhere like that. It took me ages to get over the jet lag, even though it was hot there. And I went to Vietnam as well, which had plenty of UV. So there's definitely something to be said about coming back and just being able to just carry on as if normal, because you can easily get yourself put out for 10 days or more with jet lag. If some people it's a month, and then it sort of feels like they undid everything they got by traveling. Then, of
Oh,
course, with my water and plasma and stuff in my body, there's obviously something that's retained from El Salvador, again, with the way in which water can trap, we'll just call it sort of coherent domains, or have memory per se, or maybe I just massively expanded my exclusion zones, and then I've been careful when I've been here with things that could potentially deplete them, even though I don't have much sunshine here. I've basically dived heavily into cold thermogenesis here. So it's too cold for me to go in the lake, but it's cold enough to get a really good effect from walking or just being inside with the windows open. So I've jumped from almost a polar opposite environment in terms of light and dark. And personally, I just found that was a really good thing for my metabolism. I'd have to test maybe going to El Salvador in May or something, because that's the end of the sort of non-rainy season, and coming back to the UK when it's warm to see if it's the same. Because I think partly coming back to the healing dark and cold did an additional benefit. So I would definitely, it's definitely worth going. And even if it's a long way from the UK, I mean, some people came from Australia, which is even further. It's actually all, from what I have experienced, it's definitely by far all true. And, we have to credit Dr. Cruz for bringing El Salvador to our awareness, to be fair, because he's the one who obviously talks about it the most and educates people on why they should go. And some people, the idea of even just going to Central America horrifies them, whereas I just think it's for certain is something that you should try for yourself, and every single person will get a different benefit. Just if somebody was brand new to quantum and went straight to El Salvador, they could fry because they don't have a solar callus, they don't understand about seeing the sunrise, they don't understand about the blue light, so they wouldn't get the full benefits, although they'd get some. But I've heard quite a lot of other people saying that they just went to El Salvador and they didn't like it that much because they were expecting something to happen, but they didn't have the grounding in their physiology, their body clocks, their solar callus, and they didn't maybe even have enough, melanin to offer protection, so they had to be in and out of the sun all the time. They might have had a lot of reservoir of PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, under their skin. And that's regardless of what people try and tell us, oh, it's nonsense. They do make people burn like hell as well. So, yeah. And then the other important thing I meant to mention about El Salvador is, and this is not only El Salvador, it's other places I've been. Sometimes where you're situated, you can see both the sunrise and the sunset. Because sometimes if I've been on an island, I can see the sunrise and then the sunset's on the other side. So I can't actually observe it. And then in terms of sort of more, not necessarily esotericism, but also this idea of eating the sun, and friends of mine who are breatharians that take it very seriously, there's actual benefits from watching the sun rising up, because it's obviously safe on the eyes. And I did this as often as I could, and I did find there was some thing about looking at the sun rising. So I'd watch it come up, and then when it was like a ball, I'd stop it. Although in the UK, I can't actually see it come up, but because of it's less bright, I'll catch it maybe 5 minutes after it's come up, and I can still look at it without damaging. Because if you look at bright, when it's too bright. And then the more I've delved into actual true sun gazing and talked to more very spiritual people and breatharians who actually understand physics and are not just sort of making it up, they've sort of confirmed to me that an important part of their sort of fasting or breatharianism is this ability to literally eat the sun, and you can only do it at sunrise and sunset, which I thought was really interesting because I had a chance to actually test it out for myself. And like I said before, in El Salvador, I definitely felt I had some kind of massive brain upgrade in terms of being able to piece stuff together in my head that was a nebulous, and also to be able to be more coherent in speech and more concise, but without leaving things out. And then I was able to draw on lots of old memories or things or phrases or stuff that I'd probably encountered maybe 15 years ago and just bring them really quickly to the surface and to be able to tell somebody. Whereas sometimes I'll remember what I meant to say at 3 a.m. Whereas there, I just felt like my information, stuff that even I haven't thought about it for 20 years. It could have been some complex molecular pathway in biochemistry or something. It was much more available at my fingertips. So I was able to access and convey information much better. And also, I just felt a really massive sort of coherence towards other people. It was almost like I was living from my heart center all the time, sort of like a bliss state that Dan Winter would describe, which then again is a way to access sort of better focus, sort of more sort of rapport or coherence with other people. So, and then another thing with El Salvador being so hot, it's kind of easy just to be outside all the time, like work outside or eat outside. So the actual amount of time spent outdoors in El Salvador is really easy to do, even if you don't go in the sun, because obviously some people can't handle it. The shade offers loads of benefits in it with a near infrared, and obviously it's safe. So there was definitely something that happened. And like I said, I never want to attribute anything to one thing. And like I said, I can't emphasize enough how the grounding or the foundation of health is so important to really get the benefits of somewhere like this. And I think the company and the people you meet still matter a lot as well.
There's so much to unpack there.
I
I
know.
think now, just going by what you said in the end, since you're getting a lot of energy from the ground and from the sun, of course, did you eat less?
Yes, and also I think because just so people know where we're at with the food, I when I travel, I always eat raw meat, and I know it sounds horrible, but it's not. And also, as soon as I started eating steak tartare, a few people were like, "Oh my gosh!" And then by the end, loads of people were all making it because it's nice and cool, and you can put onions in, and they were like, "Oh wow, I'm not so full now because the raw meat's so satisfying." But it could, like you said, have just been the fact that there was more sun. I definitely didn't feel like having lunch there because obviously that's when it was the height of the UV. And, you know, if I was in the sea and grounded. So definitely. And also, I didn't really feel like eating in the evening either. So sometimes I'd have just two meals, or you know, to be sociable, I'd go out and have a meal. And I was eating it knowing I wasn't even that hungry. I know you shouldn't do that, but when you go out as a group and you've ordered a fish that's given its life for you, you can't just say, "Oh, the sunset, I'm not going to eat it." And you know, so I know you shouldn't do that, but definitely in terms of desire for food, it was definitely different. But you do have more of a desire for liquids or sort of water was you know, with me and my water vortexer and my minerals and my sort of energized water, I really felt I was craving the water more. And a lot of people really loved the coconut water. And because Dr. Borosh scared me away from coconut water, saying that even the crabs won't eat it, I was a bit tentative. I mean, I did try two coconuts and I can say they were delicious. So people sort of, you know, the desire for things like lean steak tartare, not too much, and then fruit was definitely sort of there, not the desire for sort of cakes or stuff like that, or sort of heavy food or lots of fatty food. So yes, I would say. And then the place where the retreat was held was actually a place called Balance, and it was supposed to be sort of like a yoga and I think vegan cookery. And they specially cooked. I stayed somewhere separate for the delegates, sort of their version of adding meat into vegan food. But then when I tried some of their ordinary, I just tried a few things off their menu just to be curious, like a chia pudding. It's not the kind of thing I'd ever eat. And I have to say it did match my environment. And then they had lots of other sort of almost raw foods, not necessarily sort of inflammatory plants. I had something where it was some raw scallops. I asked them not to cook them, and it was just in coconut milk, lemon, and then it was chopped up cucumber and tomato. And it was like a bowl of soup. So it wasn't massive, but it just felt very satisfying for that kind of environment. Because with scallops, there's not really much of them. And then it was, I wouldn't say there's much in tomato and cucumber. So I was sort of happy with that. So, yes. And then the one thing that a lot of people like, one thing I did feel was very, very hyper all the time, like not necessarily jittery, like too much coffee or other things, just more, like I couldn't settle sometimes. And when I talked to Giovanni about this, he said a lot of people, that's why lots of people drink beer here, just to chill out a bit. So that's the one thing I wouldn't ever normally drink alcohol, but there was a few times I just really fancied a beer with somebody else, like a really cool one, which is obviously not the best thing. But that could have just been my physiology, or it could be the fact of it's very hard to sleep there. And I don't necessarily get unproductive or bad-tempered or anything if I don't sleep. I must break down some melanin or have some kind of mechanism because I just get sort of much more alert. And quite a lot of other people reported this. They said, my sleep's terrible, but I just still feel amazing. I just feel slightly sort of wired. But it could have been the excitement of the group and the stuff we did, like surfing or went to waterfalls together as well. So yes, there's definitely something about the place, and I've had several dreams since I've been here of going back to El Salvador in my own dream. Maybe my subconscious is telling me something, and then I've already in my head been planning. Should I go in May this year, or should I go back in December like I did last year? Sort of already in my head, and then this idea of, oh, I wish we could do another retreat before the rainy season, because so many people who've heard about it now said, oh, I wish I'd have come. And sometimes it's good to be the first round of people doing a particular event in your way. And then if it's a success, you can think, oh, good, we'll just do this again without the mistakes that happened. So I have to hand it to Kira and Michaela. They did do an amazing job of how they organized the retreat. And it was very quantum as well. So yes, it is something that it's worth visiting. I didn't have a chance to go to Mexico, to Tulum. It was on my list. And then from talking to locals, Giovanni and others told me that Nicaragua is perfectly safe to visit and you should go there. And you can go to Belize, that's okay. Maybe don't go to Honduras, but always fly there. And then I know some people went to Peru afterwards. But my dad went to Peru a long time ago before anybody knew about it. And then he went back recently and said it'd been turned into some kind of crazy tourist ayahuasca sort of retreat place, and he didn't like it anymore. So El Salvador hasn't really got that sort of horrible touristy, those gigantic hotels that are in sort of places like Vietnam or kind of Ibiza and stuff like that. It doesn't have that, which I think is really important as well, that it's not been distorted and affected by tourism, because that can spoil really quantum areas as well, if that makes sense. So there's lots to sort of consider about going to El Salvador, and I think it's always I never do try and reinvent the wheel. I'll always find out what somebody else recommends and take on board their experience, and then go to where they suggested. And maybe at another occasion I might be a bit more adventurous and look for new places. But then for certain, if people are interested in going, it's a really good idea to ask around when did you travel? What was the climate you traveled from and came back to like? Which airline did you use? Did you, where did you stay? Exactly, where did you buy food? It is worth getting somebody else to guide you because all of the blogs from non-quantum people I read before I went were just stuff that doesn't really resonate with me.
No, I've done an insane amount of research on countries, and I actually excluded El Salvador for two reasons. One, from what I understand, they import a lot of the meat and the animal foods in general, so you can't really get local animal foods, and that's obviously extremely important. And second, 90% of the groundwater is polluted, so you
Hmm.
don't have clean water over there. How was your experience with those two things? Because they really turned me off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was going to get to that. So, exactly with the water, even though I had my water vortexer, which is complex and to some extent can clean, I don't trust it because you have to just get plastic bottled water. And in terms of the kind of biochemistry of things that's contained in plastic, in a hot country, plastic bottles and water are a terrible combination. Like we all know, don't leave plastic bottles in your car in the summer and then drink it. Even people, even the media and the newspapers here tell people not to do that. And then when it comes to local animals, there's an abundance of chickens and cockerels, which is massively irritating as well because the cockerels all cock-a-doodle-doo at 4 a.m. So they're not on time. So it might be the blue light that's making them not do it at daybreak, or it might just be that well, we've definitely had cockerels and they cock-a-doodle-dooed at the right time-ish. It was still early, but that's very irritating. But that means there was also a huge amount of female hens. So in terms of poultry and eggs, that's okay. But then I did see somebody take their chicken flock and they just found a load of trash that somebody had dumped, let the chickens out, and they all started eating the burgers and the pupusas and the fries. So whether that's that may or may not be worse than chicken pellets, which it's extremely hard to get chicken pellets without antibiotics unless you buy from a special company. This is even like 30 years ago when we had chickens, there was this problem. Whereas if the chickens were just left to eat out of the back of the vegan restaurant, just the plants and things and some fish and stuff, it'd probably not be so bad. So exactly, you don't know what the chickens are eating, even though they're all free range. That then I've noticed also in hot places loads of times, and you've probably noticed this as well, that the skinny animals, that the Greek cats are always thin, even though they just eat everything. And then the traditional cow in El Salvador is a very thin cow, so it's more of a you wouldn't see much meat on it. I didn't really look in because it's quite jungly, the terrain, so I don't know about goats and sheep. But I would imagine they're like hot country goats and sheep. They're sort of thinner because they're more geared for surviving. They're not as domesticated, or maybe they eat food they're supposed to eat, not things that we give them. Yeah, I read the labels as well. So yeah, that is a cause of concern about the importing of meat. But I think it does depend where they import the meat from, which I don't know. That would be something I'd have to like look into because it must be variable sources because obviously their own crops are things like a coffee bean, then sugar beets, a big massive important crop to them, corn, stuff like that. And when it comes to actual agriculture of animal cultivation, I can't say I know enough about it yet, or would that's something that's really important to consider. Then obviously being on the ocean, you've got fish. But then the place where I stayed, there was a river which flowed into the sea. So, like you said, if the river's dirty, it's now putting the dirtiness into the sea, and then the shellfish, which get it first, and the fish are going to be eating things they shouldn't be eating. So you don't know for certain what's in the seafood there either. So yeah, that is a problem. And I don't know anything about fish farming in El Salvador because some fish farms in certain countries clean the water that comes in first and just give the fish what fish are supposed to eat, sort of insects, not spoil it all by giving them fish food. But I don't know anything about. I know that there's lots of fishing industry, as in we saw the fishermen going out and collecting the fish out of the sea. So I don't know about any sort of measures they take to sort of try and clean the water for the fish. So yes, so in terms of what I've said and what you discovered, would you still go to El Salvador regardless of the water and the meat problem? Because the other way around it is I could take a water distiller next time and that would solve one problem. But then, like you said, again, you being very keen on good quality meat, how would you, what do you think now about El Salvador?
I mean, I think the Yucatan Peninsula solves those problems. That's what I think. I think you've got the magnetism over there. You got the same weather, sort of. You've got deuterium depleted water, the
Oh, right,
cenotes.
whereabouts? Which country or anywhere in specific?
No, I mean the Yucatan is the tail of Mexico. So it
Oh,
would be yeah the state of Yucatan. So the Yucatan Peninsula would be Quintana Roo. It would be I believe Campeche, if that's how it's pronounced, and then the state of Yucatan. I think the state of Yucatan. I haven't been there, but I think that based on the fact that the magnetic field is like over here, I've measured it. It's zero point 0.6 milligauss. I don't know if that's typical for Sweden.
yeah, that's okay because they normally quote the average of the Earth as zero point 0.5 Gauss now. So if it's point or milligauss, or if it's zero point 0.6, it's obviously above average.
I think that in the Yucatan, I don't know if you've measured it in El Salvador, but I think in the Yucatan it's 3.4 milligauss,
Whoa.
which is amazing. And so based on Bonley's work, holy moly, I want to go there. But no, I mean, for me, it's mostly the air quality. It's mostly the country's past. And now I'm talking about El Salvador, of course, and the fact that the water is polluted. That and also, as I've expressed in another video that I made, an in-depth video about countries, it's going to become popular. It's going
Mm.
to become the next Costa Rica, and ideally, you want a place that no one knows about or a place that's big enough where you can offset the tourism, if you know what I mean. So that's
100%. Yeah.
yes. So that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, I suppose because sometimes when an area becomes more touristy, first of all, it's made safer because there was a big police presence in El Salvador, not menacing police, just friendly ones, but they were there. And also sometimes they start to clean things up if they know tourists are coming, as in water or whatever. But on the other hand, the tourists bring other problems like more demand for more Wi-Fi and more illumination. And then again, also in El Salvador, it's like in I think in Holland they sell all of their cars that fail MOTs or in crashes to Africa. El Salvador buys all of America's cars that have been written off. So you've got the problem of old vehicles, and there was definitely things belching out black smoke where that's absolutely not allowed here and in Sweden and in other countries very fanatical about pollution from vehicles where and then obviously places like Vietnam, the mopeds just make the cities really disgusting to breathe. I didn't see many mopeds, but exactly as you said, I would imagine the more people that come, it'll bring more mopeds and because it's easy to get around, and then sort of more of these kind of vehicles that are obviously safe structurally, but when it comes to sort of fuel, it's a whole other question. So yeah, I'm not sure whether actually I don't think you would have liked El Tunco because I moved out because it was too noisy and there was too many cars coming in and too much blue light. And I went up to Tamanique, which was in the mountain. So it got away from all of that. But there's still, like you said, the problem of sourcing nutritional animal-based food, and then the water's still a problem. But no, I didn't know about Yucatan. I'll go and see because I think sometimes if you've got personal experience and labs or just data or how you felt from one place, if you go somewhere else, you can think, oh my God, this is the same but better.
Yeah, and it was Cruz's preferred place before El Salvador. I just want to mention that.
Oh
But
yes.
on another note, you want to visit Greenland. And usually we don't think about Greenland as a country to move to for optimal health because, at least from a sunlight perspective, the quantum yield or the energy yield from the environment is far lower. but the magnetism is high. So why do you
And
want to go to
also,
Greenland?
oh, well, also Greenland only has a population of 60,000. So after what you said, because I thought it might be too cold, and then because it's got a Gulf Stream, it's actually at coldest sort of -4 or -5, which means you can still do things outside. And it'll be and it has snow, which is really helpful for reflecting UV. Then when I looked into the light cycles and when I can visit, it said it's better to go from February onwards, before you get the summer if you want the snow, because then you've got the light and you've also got the snow and you can go outside and trek and be in the magnetism. And then again, the whole business about overpopulation, that there's not that there's the population density, again, the problems that too many people bring are not there. Then also the place I was looking at, like I was saying before about where I wanted to see the sunrise and the sunset or a sea, there's particular places you can go where you can look at icebergs, but also you can see the aurora borealis. And I think there's something to be said about looking at natural, celestial, or geographical beauty. Like if I ever see a rainbow outside, like I saw one yesterday, I'll just stop and look at it because there's something about it that is very pleasing. I didn't try and find the end of it to look for the leprechaun and the pot of gold, but I think there would be something quite enchanting to see the aurora borealis, especially as I know the history of Christian Birkeland and Hans Alphen, sort of how they were the pioneers of understanding space wasn't empty and it was full of plasma and Birkeland currents and magnetism and all kinds of other goodies I won't go into. So I think for the Northern Lights as well, they're something that there's some kind of thing about them, like looking at the sunset. I can't say I understand or even know, but I'd have to go and do it. And then the other thing about Greenland, I'd have to look into its food and what kind of sort of food. I'd imagine it's very seafood heavy, and how
Yeah,
clean it is.
that's very easy in Greenland. You don't have to worry about that. You'll
Yeah,
find everything you want there.
but also it's like Finland. I've been there several times, and they're very fussy about food and it being clean, and not importing dirty things. So I sort of looked at Greenland just as more of a polar opposite to the equator, like I was saying. And then because you're the expert of the fine details that I sometimes skim over, it actually appeals to me even more. Because if it was -20, that would put me off because I'd spoil everything by too much central heating or clothes. And then now, if you've confirmed the food side, that's something I was going to look into next. And I'd imagine they'd have an abundance of glacial runoff water that is low in deuterium, similar to Iceland. I'd have to look a little bit more into the water there, but it definitely won't be plastic bottled water.
No, because what I definitely know is that the local population is still eating their native foods. Yes, there is
Okay.
some modernization, but they're eating native foods. They're eating raw seal, raw fish. They're eating all of those things that you'd associate with the Inuit. So you'll find everything there. You'll find a bunch of raw meat there because the people are eating raw meat over there. Yeah, so there's nothing to worry about from that side of things.
Oh, that's really interesting because the thing is, with the whole my raw journey, because I was saying to you before, I was tentative about eating raw chicken, which I never will do, but then I forgot I'll often eat raw partridge or wood pigeon or stuff that comes in the raw game in the game box, and my little tiny brain for whatever reason didn't associate it with the dirty chicken, and I can confirm to you that the whole eating of the white meat or the poultry raw has a different benefit altogether with the red meat. And if there's all sorts of other things, like I've heard about people eating seal and other sort of special raw dishes, it's just I've never had the opportunity to try it because, as you probably know yourself, for some reason, people have an aversion to the raw meat initially. And then when you either introduce the actual food to them to taste or you tell them it's actually normal here to do this and it's not weird or disgusting, especially if the whole culture in Greenland, it's normal to eat raw food, I'd probably discover a whole load of things I've not discovered before. Isn't seal really high in DHA or something? That there is something to do, or is it? There's some weird fat in seal meat, seal blubber. that's really healthy, and I can't remember exactly which one it is. It could be DHA, just because the seals go in the cold a lot, and the colder water, the more the fish make DHA.
I'm not sure, honestly, but I'm thinking about something else, which
Yeah.
is that with seals, they're filled with deuterium, aren't they, because of the collagen? So if you eat a lot of seal meat, you'll eat a lot of deuterium. But thankfully, um, you know, what the native population does and what most humans are going to do if they have functioning livers is they're going to eat way more fat than
Mm.
protein, or the ratio is going to be pretty good. So you'll balance it out. That's the only thing I'm thinking about. Otherwise, I mean, all of that is unpolluted, super nutrient dense stuff. And I mean, even if there is some really healthy fat in there, the best way to discover anything like this is to go there, to eat it, and then see, okay, how do I feel? That's the most important thing, really.
Oh,
Uh,
definitely. Because actually, it was definitely the seal blubber, not the seal meat, that was touted as being beneficial. But I think also with these Scandinavian dishes, there's the fermented raw shark that you mustn't eat just because there's so much mercury in it. But I
I
think that's more of a Swedish or Finnish dish, or even Icelandic. But that's not the fault of the shark; it's the fault of the pollution.
I just remembered what the seal oil is high in. I think it's a very good source of K2, vitamin K2. I think
Yeah,
that's the thing. Maybe there's a fatty acid that is really healthy that is found in high amounts in seal oil or seal blubber, but I know that it's a really really good source of K2. And if you read Weston A. Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, he talks about how the people in what was it? Yeah, Alaska, the Eskimos of Alaska, that they made a lot of seal oil and consumed that.
actually, you've just reminded me of something important, that just thinking about going somewhere, in terms of my heritage and my mitochondria and haplotype, the equator is sort of quite alien to what I've evolved into. Whereas in terms of me wanting to think, okay, what's the most likely thing did my nearest ancestors eat? It could well be sort of something Scandinavian and Greenland. So I'd like to, you're asking why do I want to go there? I'd like to go there and just sort of pretend to be an Inuit, if that makes sense. And then, like you said, sometimes if you do something that's not compatible with you, you'll just know about it. And other times you think, wow, I really thrived on this. Even though in El Salvador, it was obvious that the plants and the fruit and everything and stuff was definitely local, like the majority of what I ate. Um, I can't say that, when you just don't, you want to get home and eat your own food kind of feeling. Whereas the whole thing about the eating like the Inuit did, or modern Inuit, I would definitely try that for certain because, like you said, there's all sorts of benefits to those kind of foods that either we it's just like you said, a bit more obscure information, it's not mainstream, and also it's just you can try something or run some labs or HTMA tests to see if you've gathered some undesirable heavy metal or something somewhere and find out where or on the other hand, sometimes maybe if the food was suboptimal in El Salvador, that the environment overrid some of that problem, which I don't know for certain. And I don't ever want to be okay with that idea that you can just eat what you want as long as the environment's conducive. I'd still rather, like yourself, find out what do I, with my own knowledge and experience, think for me personally is the most sensible and nutritious thing for me to eat. So yeah, or you've kind of sold me even more to Greenland now.
Yeah, and you want to maximize every aspect.
Mm,
I mean, if yes, you can get a lot of stuff from the environment that sort of offsets a bad diet, sure, but for optimal health, for excellent health, what you want is you want the perfect environment and the perfect
mm.
diet. Why skip out on one of them? Uh, and I mean, if you have this big fat Earth available to you, then obviously there must be some country where you can get everything. So, I mean, what do you think are the best places to live in the world, based on your experience, based on what you've read?
Oh, I don't know. That's the thing is, it's like there's this book I used to love as a child called Goose Lays an Egg. And it was basically it goes round and it wants to lay an egg. And there's something like, a tractor seat and sort of inappropriate places. And there's always everything's perfect except it's too cold, or everything's perfect except it's wet. So I sometimes feel like that goose going round wanting to lay the egg that wherever I go, that like exactly like you said about El Salvador, there is something wrong with it. So in my way, I'm just sometimes thinking maybe I don't want to actually permanently take residence in one place. The whole don't put all your eggs in one basket thing and all my finances and just up and moving and then finding it all of a sudden where I move to, somebody builds like a football stadium next door to me. So, in terms of places to live, obviously safety and then me being able to speak the language matters. I mean, I can obviously learn and I'd have to choose where I want to go, whether it's going to be Switzerland, because that's high on my list, where I'd have to learn Swiss German for the place I want to go, or would I go to El Salvador where I'd have to learn Spanish? I can already speak French enough to be able to, be all right. And then on the other hand, I know the south, certain places in the south of France, like Perpignan, and there's tremendous water and like areas non-polluted, and it's southern enough to be able to get enough vitamin D. And then the French are quite particular and careful about the quality of their foods. So that's somewhere I have to go and have a look myself. Switzerland, in terms of what I personally like, I like mountains, but then I know it's not a good idea. And I like UV light a lot. It doesn't seem to hurt me. You know how some people try and say that the more UV or sun tanned people get, the more wrinkled they get. Actually, it does the opposite with me. But then the problem of living high up for too long, there's not enough oxygen. Although for me, who goes there for say a period of time, I always make an effort to do massive sort of hike jogs up the mountain, even though I'm huffing and puffing and sweating in the beginning. I know I'm coming back to kind of a lower latitude later. And then the Swiss are very clean. And also the other thing, the Swiss build buildings out of natural materials, and this is like really important in terms of lots of things, including not just sort of chemicals, but in terms of spirituality and being able to sort of meditate, because trying to meditate or access bliss states or much deeper than that inside aluminium boxes or metal buildings, the dielectrics of the aluminium is very unconducive to the electrical sort of centripetal physics behind human focus and attention. So I'd also want to, it's not just the actual place I live, I have to have the house right. And then there's also ways to build houses that are more sort of makes more sense from don't want to say feng shui, but sort of energetic perspectives. So that's the other difficult one. Because buying land and building a house in El Salvador is not that difficult and not that expensive. And then I can have the materials that I want and I can have it the shape I want. Whereas if I saw a house and bought one somewhere else, then, Switzerland, I'd be okay with the material. Then I don't know anything about building material in Greenland at the moment. And then the UK, as much as some people have something against it, I've no matter where I've gone, and even if I've really enjoyed it, I always want to come back, regardless, because it's the clouds here that's the biggest problem. And then, of course, I don't, with the whole movement of what's going to happen with technology and stuff in the UK, I don't know. I know there's a big tree planting movement going on, and it's definitely not dirty, as in the air where I live. It's just the clouds put me off, but it is something. It's somewhere I've got a network, and I understand the culture. So it is a difficult choice because even though I'm a half New Zealander, I've looked at New Zealand and I've never felt like I wanted to live there, but I don't mind going there. Whereas El Salvador, like I was saying, I really liked it, but after a month, the whole just roof of the sun and the heat and the not sleeping started to annoy me as well. So, and that was not right in the full sort of season of it. So I think it might be because my whole grand plan of if everything worked out for it, I could buy a house in different locations, and then I could live in it some time of the year, and other people could live in it, like have a sort of timeshare and move about. Because say for somebody who's just used to a hot country all the time and has never experienced snow or huskies or the aurora borealis or sort of what the cross country skiing in a forest, they'd be blown away by going to Greenland and getting all that cold. So and then just experiencing the UV in a different way. Also, like you said, the clean food in somewhere like Greenland and other places where they're very fussy about food would blow people away. Even though they might live somewhere with much better sun, they might have much worse food. And then having proper food, they might think, wow, this really moved the needle for me because they're kind of used to the sun. And I'm the same as you, that no matter what, there's so many pillars of health, and I find new ones that I want to optimize every single pillar to the complete maximum that I can, and not neglect one, thinking one pillar is more important than the other. So I think it's like I think the goose did find a place to lay an egg in the end of the book. So to summarize, I can't say I found a place I want to live. Definitely, I'd like to have a property in El Salvador so I could go back again. But I think on another level, I might be slightly afraid of living in a country that potentially may not it may become unsafe again. Whereas despite the UK basically spying on us all the time and there's cameras everywhere and you can't do anything, I can't really imagine a civil war happening in the UK. It's just more repressive and being watched all the time, and stuff like that, which has its benefits in other ways. I mean, some people don't like it. I don't really have anything to hide, so I really don't know. I'd have to go to more places because, like you said, it could be somewhere really unexpected that I've not thought of, that I go to by accident or on the way somewhere or out of curiosity or to visit somebody and discover the perfect place. That usually what's happened to me. If I try and do something on purpose, it doesn't work. And all of a sudden, I discover the thing I've been looking for by accident, when I'm supposed to know. Because at the moment, if you had to live somewhere else, where would you live? Or do you like Sweden? Because obviously you're healthy there.
I mean, I think I'm healthy here because you can't be a good health practitioner if you can't be healthy at higher latitudes.
Mm,
Yeah. If you can't master the higher latitudes, you shouldn't move to the lower ones. That's
yes.
what I'd say. So it's just living in hard mode and excelling at it. That's what I'm doing. But I wouldn't want to stay here. And I'll tell you that in terms of staying in the UK and El Salvador, politically speaking, safety-wise, the farther away you are from Europe, the better. Okay, I'll tell you that. So ideally, in terms of safety, you want to go to South America, and to not be influenced from a freedom perspective. That's what I'd say. And then in terms of
What do you define by freedom? Because this is kind
Paraguay,
of like, because in terms of how I live my life in the UK, I can do what the hell I want whenever I want within reason, and I can't at this moment think of something that but then again, like I said, always there's loads of things I don't know, and I'm always open to learning new things. And what do you mean about because also another important aspect is being a health practitioner myself. I can't just expect people to rent my house in El Salvador or go to Mexico for 3 weeks. I have to know how to optimize them in this country. I can't just leave my people, if that makes sense, because it seems a bit cowardly, just like brave Sir Robin in Monty Python, who bravely fled. I can't just like bugger off and leave everybody else behind, and unless I produce something like places in the world where people can go to charge up. Because this is what another important thing about the El Salvador thing is, even if you fuck yourself up, you can get better, charge up, and then come back to the UK or Europe and be fine for ages, and may not ever get fucked up again if you know what you did wrong in the first place, or then regularly go and get sort of sun, or get out of, the environment if you make people sick. So I think I kind of spoke rather than let you answer the freedom thing, because this is a really complicated question.
I mean, in terms of freedom, first of all, taxes. That's one
Yes.
thing. Second, do they send your information to other countries?
Hmm.
And third, are they trying to control the population? Like if you look at a certain country in Asia, let's not mention it, uh, it's basically 1984 over there. They've
Okay.
got facial recognition and everything. And that's, at the extreme end of the spectrum. Then in Europe it might be in the middle. In South America, it's over here. So you're free to do stuff. You're free to have a bank account and not be taxed. They won't put you in prison because you're earning money from another country and you haven't disclosed it, for example. Uh, y- you can build a house on the countryside. You can own guns and keep them in your home, for example. You can do all of these things. You're free to do those things. The government is there supporting the people, working for them. It's not there to control them and take advantage of them. And what you see in Europe is, as long as you have high taxes, that means the government is stealing money from you.
Mm.
Because the taxes don't matter because they just print money. That's how they get money. Otherwise, there wouldn't be inflation. They're
Oh yeah, the
printing
whole
money.
thing about what inflation and the world debt and what this country actually does with its taxes. I'd say we probably know more about Jupiter and Uranus than what this country does with our money. And it's like, when you sometimes don't want to know, because exactly as you said, I can't do a damn thing about it other than have this is, yeah, exactly. You can get a creative accountant and then hope that, they don't get caught. And so maybe the solution is to have more than one home and have another nationality and have a bank account in another place. Or do you think for complete freedom I can't have the ties to the UK, because obviously the government still knows I'm alive, and no matter what, it wants money, so you always get taxed early. So in case I die, at least they got their money out of me. So it's.
I mean, as long as there is not any international taxation, then you're fine. And the UK doesn't have that. So as long as you become a non-tax resident, it's fine. For the people in the US, they have to renounce their citizenship. They have to go to another country, get a new citizenship, and renounce it because the IRS will tax you wherever you go in the world. So for people in Europe, you have a strong passport and you can become a non-tax resident. So that's really nice.
Oh, actually,
And
I met a billionaire on an airplane once, and we were chatting, and he was telling me exactly what you said, because I told him all about, I'm trying to find somewhere to live, and he said, "Oh yeah, and I said, "Why do you live in Portugal and Malaga or Spain?" And he explained to me, and he said, "Oh, the best thing you can do is exactly what you said." He said, "Go and talk to your accountant. There's this loophole." I couldn't remember everything because he just like downloaded all this information to me really quickly, and he said, go and work there and use that not loophole but that facility. Your accountant will know exactly what you're talking about, and then you don't have to be clobbered. Because I think he was telling me something like how much tax he paid per year, so I could work out how much he earned. And that's, I can understand why he moved. And he did say, you've got, there is this thing which you've just described, which actually is real, and you're not breaking the law, and it's not fair on business owners to be bled dry, basically. So, to use that facility. Um, yes.
I can tell you that if he's a billionaire, he's doing something completely different than what I said. He has a trust somewhere on some other jurisdiction, and he's not spending a lot of time in the US or the UK, etc. He's not spending a lot of time in one of those countries because if he does that, he might become a tax resident and everything. And even if he were to become a tax resident, he doesn't have any assets in those countries.
Oh yeah,
And
I didn't have. It's one of these things, when you can tell somebody knows exactly what they're talking about, because he didn't boast to me, go, "Oh, I've got all these companies," and I'm. He was really humble and modest, and he was really polite, and he was really helpful, and he just mentioned like his way of telling me, "This is where I am financially and business wise. I can actually give you some advice." He just told me about the tax. But I think he said, "This is the amount of tax I would pay if I was in the UK. That's why I don't live there." And obviously I didn't ask him about his investments because it's rude, but he probably would have advised on. He did mention we talked about cryptocurrency a bit, so we asked, "What do you have?" and he told me what he had. So then I just changed a few things about. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's again a complicated subject.
Definitely. And I just want to add two things. In terms of taxes, what the modern person doesn't realize is that taxes aren't something normal. This
No.
isn't something that people have been brainwashed into accepting that taxes are a normal thing. They're not. That is your money that the government is stealing. And if you go back, you know, before World War II and World War One and everything, people weren't taxed. And if the tax was there, like during the gold standard, if there was tax during wars, it was like 1%, 2%. Like we didn't have these insane taxes. The reason why we have these insane taxes is because the more you deplete the population, the more they're, entrenched in the system. But I want to mention something about El Salvador
Oh,
because
I just wanted to add to the taxes. What about the biblical stories about all of the tax collectors who are absolutely hated in sort of biblical times? Is that just sort of a metaphorical way of explaining that, hey, you idiots, you don't actually need to pay tax. We're trying to tell it to you metaphorically through the Bible of how it wasn't even really allowed then.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's just something that supports the entire idea,
Hmm.
right? But then again, in terms of El Salvador, I just wanted to go back there.
Yeah.
I think that if you were to live higher up, 1,000 meters up in terms of the altitude, I, I think that would be much nicer for you because it's
Hmm.
colder, less humidity, and it's also going to be quieter. And in terms of pollution, I guess it's going to be better up there.
Yes,
So,
that's where I ended up going. I went about a kilometre and a half up the mountain, so I could still walk or run down to the beach because I love the beach. But like you said, the beach it's a very dirty place out, if and when you're not in the sea. So yeah, I agree there for certain about the mountains. But then I'd have to have a look because it's like, there's certain I'd be missing out on the sea if I went too far up a mountain.
I mean, if you establish your life there, let's say, then you could just go on a trip, or not a trip, but you take the car and then you drive down, or you get a taxi or something like that, and that would work out. I mean, again, I will just mention that Cruz is 1,200 meters up in terms of elevation. He's in San Jose Villanueva, above La Libertad.
Oh yes, that was really close to us. Like La Libertad is prob where I was staying. It's like 15 minutes in a car. I went to
Yes.
La Libertad.
Now, I made a video, the one I spoke about earlier, where I really went into the factors that determine whether a country is worth living in, whether it's healthy or not. And one of the things I missed was magnetism because I didn't really understand it back then. But now that I've listened to Dr. Dean Bonley, thanks to you, I understand it, you know, at an okay level. But I wanted to ask you about it, and I think it's important that we talk about it because we've mentioned it quite a lot, maybe without explaining what it actually does to the body. So, what does magnetism do to the body? Why is it healthy?
Well, I think it's like I don't actually know the full answer because magnetism and charge are interconnected, and then gravity. Because the whole thing about magnetism, people think it's something that pulls them to the ground, whereas something that people completely neglect is what gravity is, which is charge rotating. Well, it's charge compressing or non-destructive charge collapse to the 0 point, which then creates a sort of sucking force, and it's related to consciousness. And I don't completely understand gravity yet, like I don't understand magnetism, but I know it's something that provides, say, gravity, for example. It's an implosive. It's like negative ion winds. And there's something about the two that I can't quite piece together in my head yet. But in terms of biology, in terms of like magnetic fields that we make, just before DNA is going to divide, it makes its own magnetic field around it, and then it does its division. So there's intricate magnetic processes that happen inside our body, and then the gigantic magnet or the semi-big magnet that we stand on, the Earth, that's going to be some kind of force or whatever that's been there for a very long time that is in some ways a regulator of all of these electromagnetic processes like DNA replicating that happen. So obviously if DNA misreplicates or a cell doesn't divide properly, you're in deep shit basically. Then there's also the way in which magnetism can change the charge or the membrane potential so that it's lower, which is obviously healthier and better and means that things that don't belong in the cell, they can much more easily get out, and it's favorable for the mitochondria, the magnetism. But I can't actually explain to you the precise physics of why we need magnetism, because like I was saying, that there are other forces like in the environment, like scalar waves coming from the sun, which are phase conjugated pump waves that we need for our bodies and our consciousness. So the whole problem here is that I thought it used to be just magnetism, but now I've realized there's all sorts of other things that are all related sort of features of this kind of physics, because that's tied into sort of charge collapse, which all physicists know about. Einstein just didn't know where the charge went when it collapsed. And when you have non-destructive charge collapse, say a water vortex, it creates a voltage and gravity. So it's something that provides energy. So as I don't claim to understand what magnetism actually is yet, because I don't even, if magnets attracted, why aren't both the poles in the middle of the magnet? Because I don't at this moment in time, from going too deep into physics, actually even understand what repulsion and attraction is anymore, because basically to make atoms, like attracts like. So that's why I can't answer the question yet, because I don't actually understand. I just know that in terms of, like, say, what I was saying before about the big magnet in the Earth being some kind of big regulator, a bit like the Schumann resonance of all of our magnetic processes that happen in the body, of which there are many, many others. I just don't know exactly what they are. That if the magnetism on the outside that we stand on or interact with, the whole as above, so below, as within, so without. If there's something wrong with the magnetic environment on our outside, that what goes on magnetically on our insides, which is probably even less understood than light in the body, can't work properly, because the actual environment of magnetism we're in is not quite what it should be. The same as we've got all these light reactions happening inside our body. If we're not outside in the sun and getting the light on the outside, the inside biochemical reactions can't happen properly either. So I think it's in that same sort of philosophy, because sadly Dr. Bonnelly passed away, and a lot of his research, like his bone mending chamber, got confiscated. Joan, who runs Magnetico now, I'm pretty sure she's his daughter, and she wants to start doing some of his research again. It's just the company's struggling a bit. So I would say, in terms of trying to pick up his work, she would be the best person. But then I don't know exactly when he passed away, and I think it was within the last 10 years. And then because there are other aspects of physics, like I was mentioning about gravitation and charge collapse, and then things like mass just being charge that rotates and gains inertia, I can't fit this all together, because the other thing that confuses me is, we've got an electron that's like a single, nobody's found a magnetic monopole yet, like a magnetic current. So it's like the Higgs boson. It's this particle in physics that should exist, because if you look at voltage and current, you've got sort of a flow of electrons, and then magnetism. When you look at electromagnetic wave, one is 90 degrees to the other. So in terms of symmetry, there should be a magnetron, like a magnetic current, that nobody's found yet, unless they're looking at the wrong thing, Or back to what I was just trying to explain then, that maybe nobody actually even understands what magnetism is, because I actually have no idea what light is at the moment, like in terms of very deep physics. Like I understand in terms of why it's important and how to get more of it and how to avoid nasty magnets and nasty lights. But in terms of actually definitively explaining to people on a sort of molecular level with research why we need more magnetism, I can't do it right now. But the thing is, if you've dug up Dr. Bonnelly's stuff recently, you might have a better idea, because I got into it when I wanted a Magnetico and I was all over it. But then that was quite a while back, and I don't know if you've unearthed some other thing that can help me fit together what I'm trying to fit together in my head at the moment. Because in terms of me not understanding this, it doesn't actually matter. In some ways, it's mental masturbation. But on the other hand, if there's anything that I can discover in life to get more charge, or whatever, or more gravity, or because obviously if gravity is like a wave that sucks, maybe I can suck more photons at myself. Who knows? I was reading something about gravitation and light the other day. So that's the problem, that, sometimes you can go on a big mental masturbation rabbit hole and find at the end of the rabbit hole, there's absolutely bugger all practical that I can tell anybody or help my clients with, other than just gaining a better understanding of some basic principles that might be useful later. So you might have to answer the magnetism for me.
Yes. So I'll summarize it for the viewer quite
Yeah.
concisely. It's an energy source.
Yeah.
That's all. It gives us energy. It's another energy source from the environment. And the higher it is, it used to be higher 2000 years ago. It's steadily declining, which means that we're getting less energy from the earth. And the direction matters. It has to
Yes.
be the a specific direction in the way uh, that it comes out from the earth. In the southern hemisphere, it's reversed, but
Oh,
they're
yes,
used to
yes.
that, so they get energy that way. So I think that's why you had a jet lag in New Zealand for such a long time, because the magnetic field is reversed over there. So you had to adapt to that, and that's something Bonnelly talked about. That
Oh
if
yeah,
you go,
definitely. Because if you buy a Magnetico and turn it the wrong way round and sleep on it, you've reversed the polarity incorrect for your hemisphere, and it doesn't work.
yeah, exactly. Two other things, the way I understand it, because I'm saying that it's an energy source, but how? First, it makes electrons and protons move faster, and obviously that's how we create energy. So
Mhm.
just like the cold shrinks the respiratory chain, I believe magnetism sort of does the same thing. It makes
Oh,
it so that the electrons,
it contracts.
yeah, exactly. So it makes the electron flow more easy, which means that we can create energy in a much better manner. Same thing with the protons. We're very reliant on moving hydrogen everywhere, and so if you can make that process easier, then that's a great thing. And then the second thing is that it builds easy water, according
Oh
to
yes,
Gerald
yeah.
Pollack. Yes, so you get more easy. The more magnetism you have in some place, the more easy water you get. So
But
it's sort
also,
of
how does it do it? Because this is the problem that I have with myself now. Somebody might tell me, "Oh yeah, magnetism gives you more energy," but that doesn't satisfy me anymore. I have to know. And then in terms of compressing the electron transport chain, how does it actually do that? It doesn't matter if you don't know, because I don't think anybody does. And I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, for the listeners, I completely know this. I just can't explain it to anybody. Whereas you've obviously looked in it more detail. But do you happen to know how it does it, and how it ties in with? Yeah, because you've already ticked the whole the thing about the electrons and the protons moving faster. That makes sense. But then, like you said, the polarity matters, and one of those is negative and the other's positive. And like I was saying, I can't get my head round how the physics of repulsion and attraction actually work. Saying there's, I don't understand. So maybe you want to sort of carry on in a more depth thing, because I think the listeners will have took on board, like anybody. Okay, magnetism gives me more energy. I'm sold. It makes my mitochondria more efficient, and it makes more easy water. I trust Jones, therefore I just believe you, and I do as well. But then sometimes the whole naysayer people, it's like, okay, what's the next layer of this?
yeah, that's the problem. Well, I have a
Yeah.
chapter in my book called The Commandment of Intelligence, and it basically says that nature is so intelligent that it's always right. And the brain isn't even capable of coming close to understanding the processes in nature. So, no matter how much you delve deep into what consciousness is, or what light is, or what magnetism is, it can't be grasped. That's really what I think. Because again, our senses are there to help us survive in this world, but they do not. It's a representation of what's there, but it's not
Mm,
actually what is there. And so we have limited faculties for understanding these finer details of life. That's what I can say. I like to make it very practical, very, very practical. And so that's why I talked about it in this manner. But in terms of the magnetism, again, I believe that just from a physics standpoint, if you put a strong magnetic field um, somewhere, the electrons and these nanoparticles, let's say, they start to move faster. That's just the way magnetism
the,
interacts with
the,
electrons and protons, etc. So since for the over not the over no for the entire existence of life, we've been on a planet with a magnetic field.
mhm.
Life has adapted to utilize that energy for itself,
Yeah.
just like the sun. So it's not that magnetism just gives us stuff. It's that we were created inside of a magnetic field.
Mhm.
Yes, so that means we need it and we utilize it. You remove it according to Bonley. You put someone in a place where the magnetic field is zero, they freak out. They start crying and they get severe mental problems like within an hour, something like that. And then for the naysayers, if they search for Dr. Dean Bonley 2013 and they watch part 1,
Mm.
that lecture is mind blowing.
Oh, yes.
Like he puts people with heart failure in this big machine with a really strong magnetic field that mimics how the magnetic field of the Earth works, and their heart failure goes away in like 10 days. Like it's insane. There was this girl that had a liver. She had some kind of chromosome problem, and her liver was being rejected by her body. She could only eat 7 foods. She was pale and she looked sick. She looked degenerated. He put her in the machine, and during 17 hours of being in that machine, her liver was vibrating. And she didn't know what was going on. And then after 17 hours, it stopped vibrating. She went out of the machine, went to Bonley, and said, "Why did you turn it off?" He said, "I didn't turn it off." And then suddenly, she called her boyfriend in New York. They went to New York, and she went eating. Like then in the next few days, she went. You know, she ate everything basically that New York had to offer, and she had no problems. She was cured of this supposed genetic disease. So it's absolutely insane what magnetism can do. So yeah, that lecture should convince anybody that magnetism really does stuff. There was also a girl with a supposed parasite infection, and she had brain lesions. She was, she slowly got worse because she had eaten um, some pork somewhere supposedly, and then and then they did an MRI of her brain when she was really bad in the hospital, and they found that she had these holes in her brain. Then she was put on a magnetical sleep pad for 6 months, and she was fine. Then they did an MRI on her brain again, and she had no lesions in there. So magnetism is a very, very potent energy source that allows the body to do what it normally does, but much greater.
But then also that's back to what I said about it raises redox because it's very good for kicking out heavy metals because it so that would make sense. It's like the whole thing just in simple language, the more energy you've got, whether you get it from the sun or magnetism, it just provides the body with more power to be able to heal itself. So I'm just loving all of this. The only thing I wanted to say was, if you have a magnet too big, everything goes to sleep on it. So it kind of there must be a cutoff point where too much magnetism starts to do the opposite, that not drains energy, but it does something on a physiological level because you can use it as an anesthetic, well, like an agent. Didn't what was his name? Robert O'Becker put salamanders on magnetic pads, or was it him or someone else? And then they all went to sleep, and he could do surgery on them.
No idea. No
Yes,
idea. But
but
what I'm
but
thinking about is because what I've heard is that artificial magnetic fields are very dangerous. You know,
oh yeah, of course they are. Because also, like I was saying, the heart's a massive electromagnetic device that's extremely complicated that wants to vortex water in a perfect sort of spiral to make charge and gravity. And if you start putting that in an electromagnetic field, it's like going to mess up all of the harmonics because that's the other important thing in the body. Everything's based on harmonics as well, about the right resonance. So there must be, as soon as you put the most massive magnetic field in, you're going to dominate all of the small resonances, like alpha and beta waves, Maya waves, the craniosacral rhythm, all of that. And then all the cells and everything have their own resonance and different tissue, which again, obviously, magnetism in a way I don't understand yet. I can just conceive of it's going to just halt or disrupt any and also don't magnetic fields also cause electric fields and things to deviate, so you'd end up causing a problem in the mitochondria because that's just an electric current, so great big magnets are going to cause an amount of problems there. Same with if you put an electric field in another electric field, the current deviates. Isn't that Hall's law? That you mess up the current flow, which would be a disaster because we are just currents.
yeah, I have no idea. What I do know is that since they're non-native, their direction is completely, the way they're organized is
Mm.
completely different. So with an artificial magnetic field, imagine the entire magnetic field of the Earth, and I'm
Yeah.
mainly addressing the
Oh, what
Earth,
you mean like
probably.
this? It's like a,
Yeah,
torus, a
it's like
toroidal wave.
this. And
Yeah,
we've lived in a place where it's this huge magnetic field that's going in a certain direction that isn't changing because you're very small, and so it's sort of in one direction, a
like a
magnetic field that is.
unipolar magnet.
Yes. And then with a artificial magnetic field, it's sort of a miniature version of that that's sort of curved everywhere. So it's completely different to the Earth's magnetic field in terms of its direction, and so the way it interacts with the body is completely different, and that's why it sort of messes up the mitochondria and gives you cancer.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's one of these things. It's like when something's not natural, of course it's going to create a problem. That's the whole thing. So there's, like you say, with the Magnetico, it's just a great big unipolar magnet in a particular direction. And like I was saying before, if you put it the wrong way around in the UK and sleep on it backwards, it does weird stuff. It won't hurt you. It'll just be horrible or weird or not work. And I think some people that buy a Magnetico actually don't know about this or they don't read the instructions, RTFM, read the effing manual, and they put it on their bed, sleep on it the wrong way and say, oh, that was shit. And they didn't like set it up properly because yeah it does matter massively.